Hello, and in this IELTS Part 2 speaking video, I'm going to talk about a historical period you would like to know more about. You should say when it was, how you heard about it, what you are interested in, and what you know about it, and explain why you would like to know more. Now, I've thought a lot about this topic because it's a very difficult one for me to do because every country's history is different. So if I talk about a period in British history, you might not be familiar with it. And many periods in history are quite political, and in some countries it's not appropriate to talk about political events. So I've decided to talk about the 60s, which was a significant period in British history. It's not a period where there were great events happening like a war, so you don't need to think of particular events as in wars. Just think about a time period that was significant and that you are interested in. So let's take a look at the model answer. To be perfectly honest, I'm ashamed to say that I'm not into history at all. So when I read this question, my initial reaction was, oh no, but I'll give it a go. It seems weird to be talking about the 60s because it doesn't seem that long ago, but it is over half a century ago, so I guess it can be classified as a historical period. Although I wasn't around at that time, it is familiar to me because of my parents and grandparents. My parents were teenagers in the 60s, and therefore for them it is a period of great significance. Growing up, they would talk about the swinging 60s, and I became interested in it through them. The main reason why I'd like to know more about it is because there was a marked shift in terms of music in that period. It was a time of rebellion and counterculture in which the younger people were questioning everything, including authority, corporations, the government, and other aspects of everyday life. It was essentially a revolution of the status quo. Music became the voice of that generation. As a music lover, this is one of the main reasons for my interest in this particular period. Many contemporary artists have been influenced by bands and performers from the 60s. When my favourite groups such as Oasis and BTS talk about their musical influences, the Beatles are always mentioned, and so I'd love to know more about how they changed the music scene and why they are still influencing musicians today. As well as music though, there were seismic changes with regards to fashion. For example, the miniskirt was invented in the 60s. Well, I'm pretty sure short skirts were worn before this time. However, this was the decade when they became an iconic fashion item, and I think the term miniskirt was coined in this period. Culturally, this decade was a period of great change and growth, so that is the fundamental reason for my interest in it, and why I'd like to find out more. So let's take a look at the language. To be perfectly honest, I keep repeating this in many of my videos to try to get you to remember to use it, because it's just a little bit more complex with the adverb perfectly, and it makes it sound much more advanced. To be perfectly honest, I'm ashamed to say. This is like I'm embarrassed to say. When you don't feel comfortable saying something, I'm ashamed to say, I'm embarrassed to say. I'm not into. Try to use different ways of saying I like, I don't like, and this means I don't like history. I'm not into history at all. My initial reaction. Initial means first, so it's like the first thing I thought when I saw the topic, my initial reaction. So if it's a topic you get that you like, my initial reaction was, oh great, I'm happy to talk about this topic. But here, my initial reaction was, oh no. But I'll give it a go. To give something a go means to give it a try. It seems weird, strange. It can be classified as, it can be classed as, it can be regarded as, some good passive grammar. Although I wasn't around at that time, instead of saying I wasn't born at that time, it is familiar to me, meaning I know about it. A period of great significance, so a period of great importance, instead of just saying it was important. Now, you might not talk about this topic, so this phrase is not important for you, but we do refer to the 60s as the swinging 60s because there was a lot of music, a lot of dance in that period. A marked shift, very useful for IELTS writing task 1 academic as well. It's when there's a big movement, a big change, a marked shift. A time of rebellion and counterculture. Rebellion is when people rebel against authority, fight against authority. And counterculture, anything with counter means going the opposite to something. To counteract means to act against something. Counterculture, they were attacking the current culture in the UK, in America at that time, and going against it and changing it. The younger people, the younger generation were questioning everything, so good to get some past continuous in there describing the situation at that time. Including authority, so these are like the police, the people in control, corporations, companies. People started attacking companies if they didn't agree with them. It was a revolution of the status quo. The status quo is the existing situation, especially regarding social or political issues. So it was a revolution against what was happening politically and socially at that time in the UK. And music became the voice of that generation. So this means that people were speaking through music. Music was giving them their voice. It was saying things that they wanted to say. So like I said previously, instead of saying I like, I don't like, as a music lover, as a food lover, as a cinema lover, as an art lover. So you can use this for lots of different topics. Contemporary artists, so this means musicians, performers, singers, groups at the moment. Contemporary artists have been influenced by, so very good use of passive here, bands and performers. I'm just trying to get more vocabulary into my answer instead of just saying singers. Bands is another word for groups, performers, people who perform. Their musical influences. If you are a singer, a songwriter, a producer, you usually have a group or somebody who has influenced you, and these are called your musical influences. The Beatles are always mentioned. Now you're probably thinking the Beatles is really singular because it's a group, but I'm using it with a plural noun are. In the UK, we don't feel comfortable using singular nouns with words like the Beatles, the police, the football team, because we're thinking of the individuals in that group. So we often say the Beatles are always mentioned. The music scene, this just means the things that are happening in music. And they're still influencing. You have to get a range of grammar in your answer so you can see have been influenced. They are still influencing. If your grammar's not very good, then you are likely to get a low band score for grammatical range and accuracy. You must have a range. You must have different tenses. So if your grammar is not good, then try to work on grammar because it is 25% of your overall band score, both for speaking and writing. Musicians, just to get a range of vocabulary because that is important as well. Again, that's 25% of your band score. So we've had bands, performers, artists, musicians. Seismic changes, very useful for IELTS writing task 2 as well. And it means huge changes, very big changes, seismic changes. The miniskirt was invented, so some more passive here. I'm pretty sure, very useful little phrase, instead of using I think all the time, or I know, I'm pretty sure. I've put this however in here and highlighted the semicolon and the comma just to remind you to use it in IELTS writing. Some might think it's a bit formal for speaking, but I wanted to give a writing tip as well. So when you have a statement, well, I'm pretty sure short skirts were worn before this time. That is a bit informal for IELTS writing, but then semicolon, however, comma. This is very good way instead of using but you must use the semicolon and the comma after the first clause. When they became an iconic fashion item. Iconic means everybody knows about it, very, very famous. The term, the phrase, the words was coined, was introduced, was created for the first time. Adverbs are really good if you can use them. Culturally, this decade was a period of great change. Instead of just saying there was great change in the culture in this period. The fundamental reason, very useful for IELTS writing as well. The main reason. So a lot of language in this topic, like I said at the start, it is a very tricky topic to talk about. Personally, I would avoid wars and things like that because you're not going to be able to find enough language to talk about them. Certainly use this topic and talk about the 60s if that is something that you feel comfortable doing. So let's take a look at a couple of part 3 questions that you could get asked if you get this topic. What's the difference between the history taught in primary school and the history taught in high school? On the whole, I think that history is taught in much greater depth in high school. For example, in primary school, children are given a general overview of a particular period. However, in secondary school, certain periods are analysed in more detail, so if they were studying the Second World War, they would be taught about the causes of it. So on the whole, another way of saying generally, history is taught in much greater depth, in much greater detail in high school, whereas in primary school they're given a general overview. A general overview is kind of an introduction to it. But then in secondary school, so I've paraphrased here, because in the UK we call it secondary school, not high school. High school is an American term. Certain periods are analysed, are studied in more detail, in much greater depth. So if they were studying some good past continuous here, they would be taught. So great range of grammar in this answer. So let's take a look at another question now connected to this topic. Why do some people have no interest in history? Well, I suppose there could be a number of factors. Firstly, when they were studying history in school, the teachers weren't inspiring and therefore it put them off this subject. Secondly, everyone is unique and some will be fascinated by historical events, whereas others couldn't care less. It's just a fact of life, I guess. Well, I suppose, instead of saying I think all the time, and at the end you can see I've used I guess, there could be a number of factors. Always think of part 3 questions a bit like an IELTS essay. So in your paragraph you've got a few examples. There could be a number of factors, a number of reasons. When they were studying history in school, the teachers weren't inspiring. So to be interested in something, you need somebody to inspire you. So if the teachers aren't inspiring, then it puts you off. To put somebody off means to cause somebody to lose interest or enthusiasm in a subject. Or anything really, not just a subject. Secondly, everyone is unique. This means everybody's different. And some will be fascinated, some will be interested in historical events, whereas others couldn't care less. We use this phrase a lot, I couldn't care less, and it means I'm not interested. I don't care. I couldn't care less. It's just a fact of life, I guess. Something that must be accepted and cannot be changed. It's a fact of life. So very useful phrases in these part 3 answers. I personally don't like this topic at all. I think it's a very tricky one to talk about. I don't know if they'll still be using it when the new topics come out in May, but it's certainly worth having a look at and thinking about what you're going to talk about, because it is one of the most difficult ones to think of in a minute what you are going to talk about. Hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching.